Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancey Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 24, 2016, In Memoriam. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancey Eaton. As always, it's Pop Goes Your World. Yancey, what's going on this week, my friend?
I'm currently in my little recording studio, aka my shed outside the backyard, and I'm
we're high tech around here. Yeah, you're freezing. Yeah. Okay, please tell me what's the temperature out there, please.
It's currently 44 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very, very cold for South Florida. So I'm just sitting here trying to. I have a jacket and pants and like 2 shirts on and socks. I'm wearing a hat, and it's obviously at night. And I say obviously again, like I always do. People have no idea what time it is as we're recording, but here we are. But yeah, I'm freezing. How are you though?
Oh man, you know what? I tell you and you're complaining. So you think it's so bloody, you think it's so cold. I'll tell you something. Everybody probably knows one of the things I like to do before I record the show is I go and I like to have a beer. I'm Canadian. Is what we do. So I think what's better than having a beer, talking to my buddy, talking about movies and TV shows and all that kind of stuff. It's a wonderful life. I lead a charmed life. What can I say? So I go out before we get into the studio here, my studio, which is in my basement of my house. So I got a basement studio, unlike the shed studio. So I go out to my garage and I grab a beer and I come downstairs and I open the beer up and I go to take a swig out of it and nothing comes out. And I realize the beer is frozen. So don't complain to me about no 40-degree Fahrenheit weather. My beer from my garage is frozen solid. Okay, so that's cold. This is cold. This is Canada. And let's get started with the show. We've got Avatar, Titanic, T2,
Terminator 2, Judgment Day.
But here's the spin on it.
I've never actually seen True Lies.
The best scene in the movie isn't CG because it's with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Toy Story 3 made me cry.
That's the one with Tom Cruise, right?
Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Imagination is where the real power is when it comes to movie magic. Okay, so this week we're going to be talking about, obviously, 2016. Everybody was talking about it. It was like this terrible year that took all these celebrities away from us. It just seemed like every week we were getting the news someone else was passing away, and it just got worse and worse as the year went on. So I did want to kind of take a look back at things. So lots of people, lots of celebrities, were taken in 2016. So I think I'd like to talk about some of them, and certainly not all of them because there's too many to count. But and it's not going to be like our typical top 5 list that we do on every week. Instead, I just like to go back and forth and maybe mention a couple names and we can talk about them and people that maybe really meant something to you. Not necessarily the biggest celebrities, maybe they are the biggest celebrities that we lost in 2016. But Yancey, like, who jumps out for you like as somebody that we lost in 2016 that meant a lot to you? Growing up as a millennial, loving pop culture.
I mean, it's hard to just jump on one, but I mean, if there's one name I kind of have to gravitate towards, it's literally one person that I've kind of quietly mourned all year, and we've talked about this in past shows, but it's Prince. I mean, just one of the most prolific artists, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, one of the most inventive songwriters, a complete philanthropist, and just super, super creative and can play multiple instruments, and was completely an original, like entirely his own thing, did whatever he wanted, and I mean, transformed and just crossed so many different genres of music. There's so many like notable names that passed in 2016 where I instantly knew who they were, really recognizable people, like somebody like Morley Safer, like I'm not the biggest fan. I'm not going to say that I cried whenever he passed away, but he has been on TV my entire life, and to hear somebody like that had passed away, it was sad. I'm 28 years old, but that did make me feel old as you start seeing all these icons start passing away. And
to realize, like, something like 60 Minutes is a huge part of our pop culture.
Yes, huge. It has.
I've watched it my whole life. Yeah, I've watched it my whole life. And Morley Safer was one of the last sort of that original guard to go. Like Ed Bradley. He had died more recently too. Mike Wallace is already gone. So like I think Morley Safer was one of the last ones. But I agree with you. Like that was that was tough. I've been watching him forever too.
Yeah, but like
going back to Prince for a second. I was going to ask
to go back to Prince. It's one of those things where like I said, all of these, we're gonna touch on a couple of other names too that meant a lot to us, but this is the one where I literally am still like in like this like crazy morning where like every single morning I start out my day by listening to Prince songs. Like "Wanna Be Your Lover" is basically my alarm clock song, where as soon as my phone is supposed to go off, I have it programmed where it plays that MP3. It's just a kooky, really fun song, one of his earlier pieces and stuff. And I just find myself constantly going back to his entire catalog, and I've been getting with friends who have different albums and stuff that I don't have, and I'm trying to gain more of his catalog. And I believe I mentioned this in a past show too, but one of the things that I'm trying to find a silver lining in his passing is, there's so much music that has never seen the light of day that only a handful of people have ever heard. And I'm hoping that we start seeing that come to the forefront. I don't know who's going to, have control over his estate. There were even more reports coming out just today that they found out that he has $25 to $30 million of additional real estate that almost nobody knew about. He had almost 70 gold bars inside his house, millions of dollars of cash that he's hoarded up. There's got to be a ton of music and archival footage and stuff of music videos that never saw the light of day. He was obviously somebody who really kept his personal things close to him, and I'm honestly just excited to see some of that stuff come to light. But
I have a question for you regarding Prince, and I don't want this to sound glib or anything like that, because I think you and I have different opinions, or we have different experiences with Prince. Mm-hmm. Because let me put things in perspective for you. When Purple Rain came out, when the movie came out, I saw it in the theater. Mm-hmm. In 1984, okay? So I was 14 years old. I went to the movies and I saw this movie. And I thought it was really good. I liked it. And I liked the music from it. And I always thought Prince was great. And I always think of, there was a quote, I believe it was Eric Clapton, if I remember correctly. And if I got it wrong, somebody shoot me a tweet or an email and let me know. I thought I remember reading a quote one time where somebody asked Eric Clapton, and they said, "What's it like being the greatest guitar player that ever lived?" And, and he said, "I don't know, you better ask Prince."
Yeah, it was Clapton.
Yeah, and because Prince was so good, and the thing was, when you listen to a song like "Let's Go Crazy," and then that guitar solo at the end, you think the song's over, and then at the end it hits starting with that note, and then he's got the wah pedal on and doing you're like, wow, this guy can play the guitar, man. Holy smokes, as he got command of that thing. But so here's the question that I have. And again, not to sound glib or anything, because I'm kind of stuck in the past. I'm stuck in the 70s and 80s, and it's like nothing else ever exists. So I want to know, from a millennial point of view, because it kind of strikes me like Prince hasn't been relevant for about 30 years. Is that, does he keep... I don't think he's been making a lot of music lately like he did in the 80s. Is that a fair statement, or...
I don't think it's fair to say that he wasn't making music. A lot of stuff that I've read in the past year talked about how he still records. He would spend weeks on end at Paisley Park just recording music. And his problem is there were albums, especially in the late 90s, that were kind of duds. And they didn't, have commercial success or critical success at all. So he was basically maybe overthinking a little bit too critical, basically. So this music still exists. It's not like he destroyed it, but he was creating but not releasing music to the public. There are, he has a huge catalog of even of stuff that he released, not including the stuff that we haven't seen before. But I would be a little dishonest if I said that every single album was a classic, because obviously that's not true. I don't think Musicology was awesome. I don't think Lotus Flower or MP3 Sound were great albums by themselves, but Sign of the Times and Purple Rain in 1999 and Around the World in a Day, those are fantastic albums. Yeah. Just fantastic albums.
Do you think was his legacy sort of besmirched in any way when he started having trouble with the record companies, and then he went from being Prince to the artist formerly known as Prince, and he had that symbol and stuff? Because at one point it almost felt like he was kind of getting into territory of being almost like a punchline. Because of that stuff. Do you think that affected his legacy in any way to you?
I do think so, and I think it actually affected his music a little bit too, because even some of his earlier stuff, when he was still trying to find himself as a musician, he was still, there's so much joy in his music, and there was so much just explosive creativity. And during that whole ordeal with the record companies and stuff, I do feel like he kind of got stripped of his identity a little bit, and he kind of lost his way. And if you look, like I mentioned, there's commercial success and there's critical success, obviously. But around that same time, he was really struggling with both, and it did affect him. He couldn't. How are you supposed to be completely expressive and show who you are as an artist whenever you can't even own your name. I mean,
Right.
that's not just like, like a Cher or Madonna. That's actually his name. That's that's Prince Rogers Nelson. Like, I don't know, to be strict with something like that, I did think it had a lasting effect on him. I don't think that's unfair at all to say that. It's actually, I mean, it's just incredibly disheartening, but.
Right. The other thing that this always struck me about Prince was the whole idea of the Minneapolis music scene.
Yes.
and I
buzzing, yeah.
I think that whole thing that surrounded him, like when the movie came out, it was all about the Minneapolis music scene, and you're like, there's a Minneapolis music scene? Who knew?
Right.
And I think that really helped pave the way for other local music scenes to kind of get some recognition, like Seattle, for example. Like maybe the Seattle music scene maybe never would have happened as big, or people would have caught on if it wasn't for Prince opening the door to the fact that, hey, there's some local music scenes around the country that are phenomenal, outside of, the big centers that we always think of, like New York and Nashville and places like that, right? So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of cool. And the other thing too is he brought, like, you cannot, underestimate or, downplay how much attention he brought to the other musicians in the Minneapolis area at the time, like Sheena E. and Apollonia and Vanity, who also died in 2016.
Yes, he did.
And remember Morris Day and the Time? I'm telling you, when Morris Day and the Time did Jungle Love in Purple Rain, like, those guys were good. Like, there was some really good music in Minneapolis that, we probably never would have heard of if it wasn't for Prince kind of, shining light on all that too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that's 100% sure. And a lot of people, I mean, we touched base on this in a past episode. I can't remember which one. If you guys want to go back and look, you can probably find it. But, I mean, he wrote so many songs and he just gave away hits, which is just crazy. For somebody who just loved to create and he just loved to put his music out there, he was just so charitable he literally could recognize talent. He would say, hey, listen, I have this song that I know is going to be a hit. I will gift it to you for free. Like, here you are, you are now famous because, you've basically been blessed by the hand of Prince. And he did that throughout his entire career. He has so many song credits. I mean, it's just, there's so many different ways I could go about talking about him. I've had this conversation with multiple people, and it is hard. You talk about the generational gap, and that's the theme of our show. You and I see things from a different light, but this is one of those instances dealing with Prince. Like, he passes away, I go to work the next day, and I'm trying to talk to people about it because I'm honestly, like, really upset about it. And my age group just doesn't connect with his music at all. And finding somebody that had that type of connection with him musically is just, it is really, really difficult. So I would have to look for somebody who's in their late 30s, 40s, 50s and stuff to relate at all.
Mm-hmm. Again, there's some really, really big names, and I'm sure we're going to hit on lots of them. But I'd like to mention a couple of the sort of maybe lesser, huge names that we lost in 2016. Although she was huge, Florence Henderson. November the 24th. Obviously, she was 82 years old. It's a little bit before my time. But every day when I got home after school when I was a kid, the Brady Bunch would be on TV, like the reruns, right? And that's what an all-American mom looked like, I think, for an entire generation, just like Barbara Billingsley's June Cleaver was, to a generation earlier, right? I mean, you had, Florence Henderson she was like pretty, she was smart, and she wasn't just a housewife like June Cleaver was, like she had a maid. Right? And the family was well off, and she was basically a role model for a generation. And I don't think you should forget the fact that was a blended family. And TV at the time wasn't exactly like liberal in their portrayal of people's lifestyles. Like, if you think of like I Love Lucy, like Desi and Lucy didn't even share the same bed. You know what I mean? So to all of a sudden come out in like the late 60s, early 70s with a show with two families that got together, like that's not conservative, on TV. And so I don't think you can downplay the effect that she had on an entire generation. There was this really short-lived show in 1982 called Police Squad. And I don't know if you have ever heard of it, but you obviously know The Naked Gun. Right?
Yeah.
And you'll know The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad is the subtitle of the movie. There was a show called Police Squad in 1982, and it lasted for 6 episodes. I remember watching it first run. I was 12 watching it. I loved it. And after 6 episodes, it got canceled. But it was basically The Naked Gun in a half an hour TV show. And that's what spawned that movie. But what they did was every episode they'd open up with a special guest star. And then the special guest star, they mentioned who it was, and then they would proceed to die during the opening credits. And they weren't even in the show. It was like a running gag on the show for all 6 episodes. And my favorite one was when Florence Henderson was the guest star. It was like, special guest star, Florence Henderson. And she's in the kitchen making food with like Wesson oil, because she used to do these ads for Wesson oil back in the 70s. And she's cooking in the kitchen, then all of a sudden somebody just like opens fire with a machine gun and takes her out, and then she's not in the show anymore. I think she had a great sense of humor. She was she was an icon, and I really, really liked Florence Henderson a lot, so I wanted to mention her. So was there any like maybe lesser famous people, for lack of a better term, that we saw go in 2016 that kind of stand out for you? I have lots of them. Like, I
have a lot that I could talk about too. I mean, I can rattle off some. I mean, going back to like the whole music thing.
Yeah.
David Bowie is not a small name by any means. I can talk about him for a long time, but just to give you some of the smaller, lesser known names.
And the thing with Bowie too, there's so many to talk about. With Bowie, the thing that's interesting for me about him is that whole gender bending, androgynous stuff that kind of he brought to the table, especially early in his career. That kind of helped spawn Prince. Like, Prince was doing the same thing that Bowie used to do. And I thought Bowie was interesting because then he went and he totally changed his image in the 80s. He was wearing suits. He got married to Imam, the model, and he had more mainstream music. Like, Bowie was really good. And I don't think you could ever underestimate how good his vocals were. Like, man, dude's vocals were phenomenal, right? Like, oh, man. Yeah, no, David Bowie definitely wasn't a small fish, that's for sure.
Yeah. I kind of grouped them together by, like, what they were known for, what industry they were in, or anything like that. But so, Prince, David Bowie, like we just talked about. My family, both sides, huge Merle Haggard fans. He kind of got lost in the mix. Yeah. Like, if it were another year, we would have been talking about him as, like, that great legend that passed away. Leonard Cohen. I've personally never been a huge fan of Leonard Cohen. Which,
Canadian.
I mean, I'm sure I'll bring on the the vitriol from some listeners, but I'm not discrediting his talent, and I'm not stomping on his grave or anything like that. But I personally just never really got into his music. I always felt like he was just talking, and even like this most recent album that he just produced, just put out. Sorry, I'm shivering. That's why I'm talking like really funny.
Yeah. 40 degrees as my beer's frozen. Go ahead.
Yeah, come on, be nice. I wasn't a huge fan of Leonard Cohen's music, but I guess I can appreciate, because a lot of people did appreciate that. But even people like Five Dog. I mean, the 5 Foot Assassin, from Tribe, like Five Dog passed away, which was really upsetting because it literally happened the same year that they, were getting back together and putting out a new album, I think for like the first time in 15 or 16 years. And he didn't get to see it through its completion. You know what I mean? They basically had to finish that album without Five Dog, which is just insane. And then, going back to more, George Michael just passed away. Again, not the biggest fan of his music, but I understand that, like, to a lot of people, he was, he was their favorite artist. Some smaller names like Greg Lake from Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah.
He's going to get glossed over. Nobody will remember that he passed away this year. And then even like the fifth Beatle. You know who that is?
George Martin.
George Martin.
Yes.
George Martin passes away. Glenn Frey from the Eagles. I mean, there were so many names, like iconic, like just classic rock names, and just.
I'll throw out a couple if I could that were really like probably not even very well known at all. Richard Libertini. I loved Richard Libertini. So he was in 3 movies that I just absolutely loved when I was younger. And one was Fletch. And another one was Sharky's Machine with Burt Reynolds. And I really loved Going Berserk with John Candy. It was a David Steinberg movie. And Richard Libertini, you'd have to Google him. And if you looked at him, you go, oh, I know that guy. He's one of those character actors that his voice, his look is so incredibly unique. He did tons of small parts on TV shows back in the 70s, like Mork and Mindy and Good Times, Laverne and Shirley, Alice. He was on all those shows. And I really liked Richard Libertini a lot. And I think he brought so much to all of the roles, to the movies that he was in. George Gaines, he lived to be 98, and he died earlier in the year, back in February. George Gaines was on WKRP in Cincinnati one time, but more importantly, his role in Police Academy as Commandant Lassard was so funny, because he was just this dim-witted guy, and the whole scene where he's at the podium and Mahoney brings in the prostitute to go on the front of the podium with him, and so he's giving a speech. Have you seen Police Academy or no?
I've I've seen bits and pieces of it. Sorry, I thought I was muted.
Yeah,
I've seen bits and pieces of it. I've never sat down and watched the entire movie.
It's so funny. So he's there. He walks up to the podium. There's a prostitute inside the podium. So she, starts doing something to him while he's giving his speech, and he's like, "Okay, let's take a look at this next slide." Like he was just so George Gaines and Tootsie. He was so good in Tootsie. I think Pat Harrington deserves a bit of a shout out for me. He was 86 and he died. He played Schneider in One Day at a Time, and he always had the pack of cigarettes rolled up in his sleeve, and he was always coming in on Anne Romano and stuff. He was really good. I think it was also, he kind of really played up the importance of having a really strong secondary character in that sort of 2-camera, sitcom format. But there's lots more. I'm going to throw some to you. Any other ones you want to throw? Because I still got zillions of them that I just loved. But any other ones from you?
I was trying to stall as a gigantic helicopter appears to be directly over me once again. One of the downsides to recording outside is the constant dog barking and helicopters and very, very cold conditions. But
last week didn't you say like police were like scaling the walls? A SWAT team was coming to get you or something like that?
Yes, literally. But you know what, Chris? We are professionals, and this is what we do. We podcast.
That's right. Nothing stops us.
If we can make a slight digression over to sports. Yes. Muhammad Ali passing away obviously was huge. It was huge, but I mean, it's hard to talk about stuff like this and not just sound incredibly morbid or kind of mean-spirited or anything like that. But honestly, I consider it a blessing that he did last as long as he did. You know what I mean? Because that was a dude who the last 15 to 20 years of his life really struggled physically.
Yeah, I mean, mentally, Parkinson's really did a number on him. No two ways about it.
Yeah, so that part was difficult.
And it was tough too. Sorry to interrupt. It was tough watching him decline with Parkinson's, because when you think about when he was on top of his game, physically, mentally sharp, man, nobody was like him. Nobody was ever like him. And that's what, he was a game changer in pop culture. How does a boxer become such a big part of pop culture? Because he's Muhammad Ali, and he was bigger than life, and the wit and the whole float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, and he was phenomenal, man. He was on his game. And
it wasn't even just the boxing though. It was
that's exactly.
He was such a political figure. Yep. Even now, I mean, his whole life, he, obviously he converted to Islam, and it's, he took a stand. I mean, some people might call him being a draft dodger, but he was basically saying look, I'm a man of color and I'm being discriminated against in my country, and then I'm supposed to blindly, go to war and die for it. I can't, I can't even sit in a restaurant with some white people, and I have to go fight what he viewed as a white man's war. I mean, there's a lot of, politics obviously involved with that, but I mean, the dude was still huge. That was one of those. I mean, if you had to go with the 4 or 5 biggest deaths, obviously Muhammad Ali, from a global perspective, I think he had to be right up there. I mean, one of the most iconic names of all time. Some other sports names, though. I know you're not probably a huge basketball fan, but Craig Sager. Some folks listening to this, I'm sure they watch basketball. Craig Sager, longtime sideline reporter, does all the pregame and stuff like that for NBA, and you might remember seeing him, Chris, from highlights and stuff. He always wore very, very eccentric suits. I'm talking about the craziest prints and color coordinated print, just insane stuff. I've loved Craig Sager for a long time. He's been battling cancer for several years, and he would go into remission, and then he would be gone for a while, and he would come back, and you could see before your eyes every time he was back on TV, his health was deteriorating. To see him lose so much weight and stuff like that, but he was just such a, I mean, everybody loved him. Coaches loved him. Even coaches like Greg Popovich of the Spurs, who's synonymously very short and rude and abrasive when it comes to the press, absolutely loved him. And to see, going back to Morley Safert, somebody that you were used to seeing on TV for so long, for me to watch basketball games and know that I won't see Craig Sager again is honestly very, very upsetting. And then you had people like Pat Summitt. She was the longtime Tennessee Volunteers, the women's basketball coach for the Tennessee Volunteers. Her passing away, same thing. Long illness, basically, that she was fighting her whole life. I can't even remember what it was specifically, which makes me sound horrible. But the one sports one that really, really affected me most, and this too as a baseball fan, was Jose Fernandez passing away. Waking up in the morning and seeing that, and literally just searching article after article after article, trying to find something that would be like, oh, hey, this is a hoax. Everybody's, just spreading around this internet hoax. Don't fall for it, kind of thing. And, it's wild. Every couple of years, a professional baseball player will pass away while they're still active. You know what I mean? That's, if you have a league where there's 900 or 1,000 players, sometimes it's going to happen where somebody will pass away. But I can't remember in my lifetime where you had a player who was, literally the all-time leader in strikeout percentage, a Cy Young contender. This isn't hyperbole, literally one of the best pitchers in baseball to be taken from us like that, in like a boating accident overnight, and there's all kinds of unknowns as far as what happened that night before and that morning of. I'm not going to get into that stuff, but just to be stripped of literally one of the best baseball talents in the world, as a huge baseball fan, was just incredibly, incredibly upsetting. And to see all of the media coverage and all the tributes and stuff living here in South Florida was just, it was that part was particularly upsetting. Arnold Palmer passed away this year too, but Arnold Palmer, I'm not sure exactly how old he was. I thought he was at least 90. It's sad to see, icons like that pass away, but Jose Fernandez was in his like early 20s. You know what I mean? He had a pregnant girlfriend, and just that whole situation. I think Prince and Jose Fernandez, those are probably the two that really stuck with me the most. Yeah. What about you, Chris?
I'd like to give a shout out to two Garys that we lost in 2016, and one is Gary Marshall. And I've mentioned him on the show before, obviously directing movies like Pretty Woman, and one of my favorite comedies of all time, Young Doctors in Love, which I've mentioned on the podcast before. And of course, his work in television. Happy Days. Without him, there's no Fonzie. So, Gary Marshall was big. And another one is Gary Shandling. And I feel like Gary Shandling kind of got lost in things in 2016. One of my favorite TV shows I have mentioned on the show before is Freaks and Geeks. And that scene in Freaks and Geeks when Haverchuck, played by the one and only Martin Starr, there's a scene where he's at home alone and he's watching Gary Shandling's first appearance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And Haverchuck is just like dying laughing. He's spitting his food out and laughing. I think that scene represented how a nation felt because Shandling was really, really funny. Really funny. And when he did the Larry Sanders Show, it was so incredibly unique. And I think if you were to go back and watch it now, you'd be kind of like watching it, like for yourself, Yancey, if you'd never seen it and you just went to go back and watch the Larry Sanders Show, you'd be like, well, what's the big deal here? But back in the 90s when it was on, because it ran from like 92 to 98, there was nothing else like it ever before, to have like a show like that that's kind of like supposed to be a reality show, but it's not. It's scripted. Like it's not. Is it improvised? So those are two guys I think deserve a big shout out for me. And then of course, Star Wars. We talk about it every single week on the show. Lost two of their own. This past year that were really big. Obviously, Carrie Fisher. What the heck do you say about her? She's a princess, for crying out loud. And even some of the stuff that she did outside of Star Wars was really, really good. Like in the Blues Brothers, I thought she was great in the Blues Brothers. And even that scene in Austin Powers, the first Austin Powers movie, where she's the therapist running that sort of group session with Dr. Evil, that was really funny stuff. She was incredibly good at looking at herself and making fun of herself and kind of putting it all out there. She was a pretty special person. And obviously Kenny Baker from Star Wars 2, right? He left. And the thing is, he's another guy too. I even enjoyed like his stuff outside of that. There was a movie from when I was a kid. It's called Time Bandits, and it was actually really, really good movie. I liked it a lot, Time Bandits, and he played in that. He was Fidget, and he had small movies and tons of them. There's small roles in lots of movies like The Elephant Man and Flash Gordon, Willow. He did all kinds of stuff. So, Star Wars lost two good people there too. Any other ones that strike out for you? I've got a couple more, and I want to give you a chance to get into.
I can throw in too. I'm a huge space nerd. I've always been my entire life. If you could take a time machine back to like 10-year-old Yancey's room, I had to share it with my older brother, and he's a slob. But aside from that, literally my entire room was just covered with maps and like the Apollo landing photos and literally headshots of all of the Apollo astronauts. Yes. Of course, we're going to think about John Glenn. John Glenn, obviously an icon, lived a really long, just amazing, incredibly, incredibly interesting life. But we lost 2 Apollo astronauts this year. Edgar Mitchell too. He was kind of lost in the shuffle. Obviously, not nearly as famous as John Glenn.
Yancey, sorry, just to interrupt, not to interrupt you. There's a movie I want you to go back and watch if you haven't seen it, because you like all that kind of stuff. It's called The Right Stuff. Have you heard of it? Have you seen it?
I have not, no.
Okay, it's called The Right Stuff. Write it down. It came out I want to say it came out in 83, 82, if I remember correctly. And it's all about the early NASA program and John Glenn and all those guys, and how the astronaut program was kind of came around and came to be. So anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go back and watch The Right Stuff. It was really, really good.
The Right Stuff.
The Right Stuff.
I would definitely get down on that whole era.
It's good.
I mean, people don't understand that, you see these little, you read little bits and pieces and stats and little, cute pictures and stuff like that when people pass away, that kind of gives you like just a brief snapshot or a little factoid about their life. But one thing that always stuck out to me was, John Glenn was basically doing calculations inside the Apollo craft, like, nowadays, like my first gen iPhone, the very first iPhone that came out, had more computing power than the entire Apollo space program did. And that just like floors me, that what these guys are capable of. And even now, space flight is one of the most dangerous things a human being can possibly do. That's not hyperbole. Like that is true. So imagine going back, in the 60s and 70s and being an astronaut and knowing that there is a very, very high likelihood that you are not going to come back home. Or if you do come back home, you are not going to be alive or in one single piece. And, to lose 2 astronauts like that, it was, like I said, whenever somebody dies that is much, much older, it's sad. It's not, it doesn't rip your heart out like somebody who's young and still has so much promise. But it is sad to see, people who accomplish so much leave us. It makes me feel like I need to do something. You know what I mean? I keep developing this sense of urgency. Every time somebody passes away, it's like, if I were to die today, like, what is my legacy? I hope it's this podcast, Chris. I hope in 30 years we're still doing this podcast. But I just get that feeling with all these people. There's still probably 20 or 30 more names we could list, but every time I see these, you see it on Twitter as soon as you log in. It's like on the moments, and it's the first thing you see when you wake up, and it's upsetting. But that's what it always makes me feel, is like I really want to accomplish something great, and that I try to pull positives from stuff like that.
Alan Rickman, I want to mention too, because I think if you go back and watch Die Hard, the original, it's like a textbook, of how a villain is played. Like, Rickman was phenomenal. And I think he also took it to another level in the Harry Potter movies, because he was able to take Snape and play up a whole other side of the character. Like you never really knew what his motives were. Like, he wasn't just a bad guy. Like, there was a whole lot going on with that character, obviously. I think Alan Rickman was a phenomenal actor. Gene Wilder was another one for me. He was a really, really special talent. A lot of people remember him from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but for me, his role as Jim, the Waco Kid in Blazing Saddles, was probably his best work. But I also really, really liked him in Stir Crazy. And another one too was his role in Woody Allen's Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask with the sheep. I gotta tell you, man, that guy was a comedic genius, and he was so original, like, and such a unique talent. He could do it all. He could dance, he could sing, he could act, and he was just so bizarre. But yet, whenever he played a scene, like, he had such humanity about him too. He was just, you'd have to write a thesis on what he was able to accomplish. And then the last one for me that I would like to mention is, because we're up against the clock, is Alan Thicke, because
really,
yeah, because he's Canadian, right? And the thing was, like Alan Thicke was an interesting guy from a Canadian point of view, because Alan Thicke took a long time to get going. So we knew about him in Canada for a long time, and he was on, like, he had a talk show here, and then he kept trying to get his foothold in the talk show world. That was like his thing. Yeah. And he had a show called like The Thick of the Night, and then it was called,
I was going to ask you that as a trivia question. Yeah, damn it, Chris.
Yeah, In the Thick of the Night. then it changed to The Thick of Things, and then it was like the name changed a bunch of times, playing on the word thick. And then obviously when he was in Growing Pains, he was like this dad, and so Alan Thicke was pretty cool. But the only reason I mention Alan Thicke is because I want to mention one other thing, and I think I don't want to get all political on you, Yancey, but I think this is important, is that not only did Canada lose Alan Thicke in 2016, and like I say, I know it's a pop culture show, but I just want to mention this quickly, if you don't mind, because
Rob Ford.
No. I think there was something bigger that Canada, because I'm obviously Canadian, so I just got to go off on a rant for a second. There's something bigger that Canada lost in 2016, and I think that 2016 is the year that Canada finally lost its inferiority complex. In case you don't know what I mean here, Yancey, Canada, we have a major inferiority complex in this country because we're a country of 35 million people and we're bordering up against a country of 350 million. And not only that, the country that we're up against, your country, is arguably, the biggest superpower in the world. Right? The self-proclaimed greatest country on earth. And we have to be right up against you guys all the time.
To be fair, other people proclaim it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But, obviously you can get a bit of an inferiority complex, about, yourself and where you fit into the world. But I'll tell you what, I think with everything that's gone on over the past year to the south of us, I think Canada's finally been able to step back, take a look at things and kind of go, you know what? We're not so bad after all. And I think we've really kind of got our together, and we're never going to go around and start beating our chests, and telling everybody how amazing we are. We don't do that. We're Canadian, for crying out loud. But I think the world is finally looking at Canada and going, hey, this is a pretty stable, progressive country that has a lot to offer its citizens, has a lot to offer the world, and I think for the first time in our history as a country, we're finally okay with that. It's been a very interesting transition for us, I think. I saw recently where in the New York Times named Canada as the number one place in the world to visit. And we're routinely at the top or near the top of lists of the best countries in the world to live. And 2017 is going to be our 150th birthday. So I think we're finally able to look at ourselves in Canada and say that the inferiority complex that we've had our whole existence is also a casualty of 2016. So yeah, so there's that. I just want to mention it. So, and Yancey, you got to come up for a visit sometime. I'm telling you, you are always welcome here. Coming up from South Florida, though, man, you got to wait until the summertime because otherwise you're going to come up, I'm going to offer you a beer, and it's going to be frozen. So
I can't do that, Chris. I'm literally sitting here with my teeth chattering. I'm like struggling to form coherent sentences, and the idea of me going up to Canada, like I said, it's literally...
In the summer. You come up in the summer. Our summers are beautiful. Most people don't realize this. Southern Ontario is the same latitude as Northern California. Okay, people don't realize that we dip down below the Great Lakes, and it's really nice and warm here. So make sure you come on. Anyway, let's have some
fun with Yancey.
Okay, Yancey, I got some things for you. You mentioned how much we love baseball, and obviously you mentioned that Jose Fernandez passed away. So here's a softball question for you, Yancey. What number did he wear?
Oh.
Oh man! I thought it was a softball. Everybody was wearing it on their hats.
I've owned a jersey. I've owned a Jose Fernandez jersey.
I got him. Yes, I got him. 16. 16.
I was honestly going to say 26. I knew there was a 6 on it. I just blanked.
Okay,
this is so bad.
Okay, I'm going to go from that one to a really tough one for you. Okay. Carrie Fisher. We mentioned her. We love her to death, right? And she died this past year. Love Star Wars. Okay, we know that. We mention it every single week. So, so she is royalty in the Star Wars universe, but she's also Hollywood royalty, right? Her mother, of course, Debbie Reynolds, who died unfortunately the day after Carrie passed away. But and by the way, just as an aside, sorry, Debbie Reynolds. What about her? Singing in the Rain. When you think about that movie, she learned how to tap dance just for that scene. And she held her own with two of the greatest of all time in Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor. Man, no mean feat. Wow,
my very first girlfriend, Christopher, very first girlfriend, her favorite movie was Singing in the Rain. I had never seen it. That's not my family's cup of tea at all. And she's like, please watch this. Please watch this. I'm like, honestly, I hate musicals. I think they're stupid. I think they're corny. And I sat down and watched it, and it was one of the most genuinely charming, beautiful movies. Just beautiful, beautiful movie. And it's one of those movies, I mean, how old is it at this point? 60 years old, 50 years old? I don't even know, but it holds up.
It does. Really, it's great. And the dance numbers and Donald O'Connor, oh, man, that movie, it is good. And she was phenomenal in that. But anyway, so Carrie Fisher, obviously her mom's Debbie Reynolds. She's a product of Hollywood royalty. Mm-hmm. Who was Carrie Fisher's father?
Oh,
and don't say Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Tough one.
Man, my wife is her. My prince is her.
Look to the last name. Look to the last name. It's a tough one. It's Eddie Fisher.
Eddie Fisher, okay.
Was
my wife would know this. She's probably listening 24 hours from now, just screaming into her iPhone.
All right, Prince, we mentioned him. You talked lots about him. He had a total of 5 singles go all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Which song was the first of his to go to number 1?
The very first?
Yeah, his first single to go to number 1.
Oh, man. He had a couple albums out before he got a number 1.
Sorry, time's up. It's When Doves Cry, June of 1994.
That was his first number 1 hit?
Yeah, his next one was Let's Go Crazy in 84, followed up by Kiss in 86, Bat Dance in 89, and Cream in 91. Okay, I'm going to give another lesser-known person that died in the year, but Robert Vaughn, okay, probably best known as Napoleon Solo from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Now, way before your time, Yancey, I know, but one movie that he was in wasn't before your time, and that was his 100th film credit. This movie came out in 1998, right in your wheelhouse, okay? Vaughn played Baxter Kane. He was the owner of a professional sports team, the Dallas Felons. Can you name Robert Vaughn's 100th movie, Yancey?
Baxter Kane?
Yeah.
Oh, it's basketball.
Yay! Yes. Very good.
Yeah, that is such a stupid movie. That is such a good, stupid movie.
I like it, though. It's pretty funny. Okay, Glenn Frey, you mentioned he died January 18th. He was 67 years old. So on the Hot 100, we already mentioned on the Hot 100, Frey made 5 visits to number 1, all with classic Eagles singles. Can you name any one of them? Just one of the 5.
Witchy Woman. Really?
Yeah, that ain't one of them.
Life in the Fast Lane.
That ain't one.
Hotel California.
Hotel California is one. Yes, from 1977. Best of My Love. One of These Nights from 75.
One of These Nights.
New Kid in Town in Hotel California from 77. And Heartache Tonight from 79. So, okay, the last one here for you, George Michael. Okay. Lots of hits over his time in the spotlight, right? You know, he had songs both with Wham, and he was also had a really successful solo career. So, Yancey, of all the hit singles that George Michael's released over his career, which one spent the longest time at number 1?
Careless Whisper.
Ooh, close. That's number 2. I'll give you one more chance. Yes, Faith is number 1. Gotta have faith, man.
Not I Want Your Sex.
No, that one actually it did make it. It made it as high as number 2 in 1987. Never made it all the way to number 1. Yep.
There you go.
So very good. Anyway, yeah, kind of sad to look back on a year like that where we lost so many people and it was such an unbelievable year. Let's just hope 2017 has a lot more good than it does bad. That's obviously the hope. If you want to reach out to us here, you can reach us on Twitter at @CMcBrien or at Yancey Eaton. Shoot us an email, Chris or Yancey at popgoesyourworld.com. And until next time, this is Chris McBrien saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at @CMcBrien or at Yancey Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.